For our next element in the layout, we're going to go back and use some of the tools we learned in the previous chapter to draw a camera icon. Now once again, I want to put this in its own layer, so I'm going to go up and add a new layer. We'll name that layer Camera Icon. And I'm going to start with just a simple tool that we used before, the rectangle tool. I'll set this one up so we make a white rectangle with no stroke. So I'm going to remove the stroke by going back to the red slash. And the other thing I'm going to use this time is I'm going to use the options down here at the bottom, which allow me to add rounded corners to my rectangle. Now I'm just using the standard rectangle tool first, and I can go ahead and add a value in that I want to use for a radius, like let's say 10. With the link option set on, it's going to use a 10 pixel radius for all four corners, and when I draw a rectangle, I see those rounded corners right on the edge. Now that's okay, but using the normal rectangle tool, we've seen that this isn't really a rectangle. This is just a vector shape that starts out with the shape of a rectangle. If I go back to my normal selection tool, and we grab any of these edges, we're going to be reshaping those corners, and we'll lose the rounding. So let's try another tool. I'm just going to click on this shape that we drew and hit delete. Now underneath the rectangle tool, if we click and hold it down, we've got those other tools available to us, and two of them are listed as primitive tools. Let's try the rectangle primitive tool. Now with that tool, let's just draw out a rectangle. I'm going to put one right up here at the top corner. And let's zoom in so we get a closer look at what's going on. I'll use Command plus on the Mac here, or you can use Control plus on the PC. And you'll notice when you have something selected, it'll automatically center up what you're zooming in on, so we can get a really nice look at this. What we see different about the primitive tool is it's got some handles on the corner. I'm going to switch over to my selection tool, and if we grab onto those handles, we can actually adjust the rounding on the corners of this rectangle right here. Now I'm going to use that rectangle as our camera body for our icon, and I'm just going to draw another one. So let's choose our primitive rectangle tool again. And I'm going to make it like the flash mount on the top of the camera. So we'll drag another one out up here. Notice how it's also keeping the same settings for rounding the corners as the last time we used the tool, but we can adjust this one independently of the first. So I can reduce the rounding and just pull it out a little bit there. Now the primitive tool is kind of unique because it stays with the shape. It's not going to be acting like a normal vector tool. So we can click on either one of these and go back and make adjustments to it whenever we want to. We can also make this act like a normal vector simply by taking a look at how that vector is going to be represented under the grouping options. Now if I take the lower rectangle and we go up to Modify, you'll notice that I can ungroup it from a primitive. When I choose that, what I get is a drawing object, and we've already seen we can ungroup those. I'll choose Modify and Ungroup. And now I just have a normal vector shape. We can see right over here in the property window. Now let me just deselect everything, and we'll go back in and select our shape. And now you can see the crosshatch just like a normal vector shape as if we had used the original rectangle tool. In fact, I can modify my camera by pulling out the sides and giving it just a little rounding so it doesn't look quite so square. We'll just select that one, and you can see it's still a rectangle primitive. Let's ungroup it as well. I'll just go to Modify, choose Ungroup. Once again, that gives me a drawing object. And I'll do it one more time, and that'll drop this down into a normal shape. Now, I don't have control over those radiuses anymore, but I can still go in and make changes like we would for a normal rectangle. In fact, let me click away from everything. We'll go back and select our shape, and you can see, just like we saw before, this is all glued together as one outline now. I'm going to grab these corners here and just pull them out a little tiny bit so that we give some definition to our flash at the top. Now, as you can see, we've actually used the benefits of both the primitive tool and the normal vector shape in order to create the shape that we wanted for our camera. Let's just try out the oval primitive tool. I'm going to select that primitive tool right from my selection menu, and we can see that it has some other interesting options. A start and end angle, and an inner radius. Now for this one, I want a stroke and not a fill, so I'm going to just take my stroke color, and I'm going to set it to blue, And I'm going to take my fill and set it to the red slash, so we won't draw a fill this time. I'm going to use the tool to drag out a circle that will represent our camera lens. And I want this to be a circle instead of an oval, so I'm going to hold down the Shift button while I drag. And you can see that just gives me a circle each time. You can do this with any of the rectangle or oval tools. Now the option I'm interested in for the circle that I've drawn is the one all the way down here at the bottom, which is the inner radius. If I pull that one out, I can actually make a second circle, and I'm basically creating something like a donut shape. Now once again, if I go back to a normal selection tool, I can move this around and I can operate on all the other elements. Let me center it up a little bit for my lens. And I can make changes to any of those properties I want to, as long as this remains a primitive. But as we saw, I can drop this down to a normal vector shape just by ungrouping it twice. So let's do that again. I'll choose ungroup and ungroup, and now I have a normal vector shape again. And as we saw previously, strokes will cut apart fills. So I should be able to select this inner fill and simply delete it. Now that's all I actually wanted out of my primitive tool. I didn't really want these strokes, I just used them for cutting purposes. So I'm going to click on the outer stroke and delete that, and the inner stroke. And you can see we've created a nice little camera icon that we can use for our site branding. Now let's just zoom back out so we can see what everything looks like. I'm going to use my pull-down menu, go back out to 50%, and I'll just use my hand tool to center this guy up. And our icon looks pretty good in the layout.